Today on ADG Pro, we're going back to System Shock once again, but not to actually play System Shock. I mean, we will for a little, but one thing that's frequently glanced over in any discussion about System Shock are its minigames, of which there are 7 in total. So for today's video, the focus is all on the minigames, including where to find them in the game world itself, and what to expect with each one should you decide to play any of them for more than just a minute or two. However, before we can play the minigames, we have to acquire them, as each one is scattered throughout Citadel Station, mostly in cyberspace, and in order to get all 7, you actually have to get pretty far into the game, all the way up to level 8. It's also important to note that 3 of the minigames are missing from the floppy disk version of the game, so if you want to find and play all 7, you need to be running the CD-ROM version. Now, thankfully, all of the minigames can be collected with the plot set to 0 when selecting your difficulty settings. In fact, you can get almost the entire experience possible from the minigames with all difficulty settings on 0, so that's what I'm going to be doing in order to get around the station and find them. The thing to note with the enemies on 0 too is that none of them attack you, and a single attack from any weapon will kill any enemy, though cyberspace has its own mechanics in regards to attack damage. Now, this is important to note because if you're just racing around the station collecting stuff, you may end up getting blocked by the enemies with no real way around them, other than hitting them with a weapon of some kind. In any case, here's the list of the 7 minigames we're going to be hunting down. Ping, Road, 15, Eel Zapper, Bot Bounce, Triopto, and Wing 0, though we won't be getting to them in that order. The first minigame to find is Ping, which is very difficult to miss as it's easily acquired in level 1 cyberspace. The next game, Road, is found by heading to the level 2 library cyberspace access point, and then being watchful for when you enter a green connecting tunnel with solid walls in it, as the software cube is dark brown in color and easy to miss. Next up is Wing 0, which can be found in the Level R cyberspace section, and while it's not hard to miss, it's also not immediately obvious that the path leading to it is even there, since it's a dark blue tunnel which turns black, separating off from a bright yellow room. Next up is Bot Bounce, which is found in the massive open area which is level 5 cyberspace, though to get in there in the first place you have to survive a trap Shodan has set for you. Again though, this cyberspace area is just wide open, so hunt around and you'll find the software cube before too long. Now, level 6 is interesting because it has 2 minigames to find, along with the only minigame not found in cyberspace. Now, the cyberspace access point is pretty easy to find, and the Eel Zapper game within is also not too difficult to acquire. There's a fork in the tunnels which you have to choose between, which then merge a little later, with Eel Zapper being in the room that the 2 paths merge into, so it's hard to miss. As for the other minigame on this level, simply find your way into the theater area, and a software disk will be on the ground containing the game 15, though it's labeled Triopto Fun Pack Module, and thus doesn't actually tell you what game it is. The last minigame you'll find will be Triopto, and is found fairly easily in level 8 cyberspace, as it'll be the first software cube you encounter. So, since the focus today is on the minigames, I'm going to have the game capture zoomed into the MFD for the remainder of the video here, though I do want to note that many of the minigames support rendering with a transparent background while you have full screen mode engaged, as opposed to the usual sectioned interface. Also, if you open up the game selection menu and don't touch the controls for about a minute and a half, a little bouncing line screensaver will start up. Now, it's also possible to glitch this screensaver into existence just from loading a saved game, though I'm not sure what the prerequisites are for making it pop up that way. Anyways, let's start things off with Ping, since that's the one you're going to find first, and it's obviously a pawn clone. Now, the player's paddle at the bottom follows the mouse cursor, while the AI paddle is at the top. The idea here is that the first to score 7 points is the winner. Though you need to be careful because your paddle has a fixed speed at which it follows the cursor, meaning if you try to get it to move too quickly, it simply won't. So you need to try and judge ahead of time where the ball's going to go. If you try to play this in a reactionary way, you're just going to lose. Keeping with the ball and paddle mechanics, let's cover Bot Bounce next. Bot Bounce is kinda like a cross between Space Invaders and Breakout. You have 3 lives and need to clear the field of bots before they reach the bottom. At least, that's how I think it works, because quite frankly, I've never lost a round of this game without simply running out of lives. And when you clear all the bots, they come back and you do it all over again. Now, this game feels like it wasn't actually finished because there's no score counter, no lives counter, no anything to give it any sort of meaning or purpose. Which actually doesn't surprise me. Other people who've looked through the game's data files have noted that it seems as though there were plans to originally have 9 minigames in place, yet it's clear there wasn't enough time to flesh this out as much as they wanted to. Even though, as we're going to see, some of the games here did indeed get a lot of attention. Definitely not this next one though. Road. This game plays a lot like those old LCD games, where the goal is simply to survive as long as you can by driving a car down a 3-laned road, avoiding the other red cars while running into green cars to clear the field. This is another minigame which doesn't feel finished because, again, no score counter. But also, it's impossible to actually win this game, as no matter how long it takes, sooner or later the game's going to throw an impossible set of cars to dodge, like 3 in a row horizontally, and then you pretty much have to lose. Also, I don't know if it's the game itself or the emulation or my mouse, but often when I left-click in this minigame while in the right lane, my car will cross 2 lanes to the left as opposed to just 1. Now if I click and hold the button down, I'm guaranteed to just get 1 lane switch. Again, no idea if this is a bug with the game or something else entirely. Next up we have Triopto, which is quite obviously a tic-tac-toe clone. And this is one I actually wanted to deep dive into because for the longest time I've wondered if maybe it's possible to win against the AI here, as the AI will sometimes make somewhat questionable moves to counter your own questionable moves. For instance, depending on how you're setting things up, the AI will often ignore a move which would produce an immediate win, and instead go for setting up a potential guaranteed win instead, even though the AI could have won right in that moment. Plus, the AI is not random. It counters every move you make with the exact same move every time, with the only layer of randomness being who gets to go first, and if the AI goes first, the first move they make is 100% random. But then from that point onward, no randomness whatsoever. In fact, there's a way to trick out the game mechanics, causing it to show a completed horizontal or vertical line by the AI in an otherwise completely empty row or column. Heck, System Shock 2 has its own tic-tac-toe game and is clearly using the same AI and mechanics because it suffers from this exact same bug. But yeah, I've never found a way to beat the AI here, and it would take a maximum of about 4,400 permutations to check every possibility. So yeah, I kinda don't have the time to analyze that. It makes me wonder though if the game even has a means to detect a player win or not, and what it would say if it did. Next up is 15, which, as you might expect from the name, is a simple 15-tile sliding puzzle. Now, me personally, I'm not terrible at these, but I know a lot of people don't like them. Unfortunately, as you can see here, it doesn't really do a lot of shuffling, so it's not hard to simply go backwards through the same motions to complete the puzzle. Once you complete the puzzle, you can click again to shuffle again, or if you close out of the game and go back in, it may use a different image. There's a small handful of images it can use, including one specifically made for this minigame, which has the proper numbers in place. However, remember earlier when I said that you can get almost the entire experience of the minigames with all difficulty settings on 0? Well, this is the one exception, as 15 here is affected by the puzzle difficulty setting that you select. The higher you have your puzzle difficulty set to, the more shuffling is done when starting a new game of 15. Now here's how much shuffling you would see with the lowest puzzle difficulty, which as you saw was barely anything, but here's how much shuffling you get on maximum puzzle difficulty. As you can see, it's a lot more shuffling, and thus a lot harder to get the image back into a completed state. These last 2 minigames, though, are quite frankly pretty complete experiences. Now, this next game here is Eel Zapper, which is kind of like an inverted missile command. Now, eels come up from the bottom of the ocean, and you need to protect your swimmers by firing rocket-propelled depth charges. Now, even though each of your launchers looks like it only has 10 rounds of ammo, they each actually have 30 rounds of ammo, and will refill twice back up to 10 shots when they run low. Now once you clear away all of the eels in a level, you get an end of level bonus based on how much ammo you have left and how many swimmers are still alive, then you move on to the next level. One of the first things I need to point out about this game is that the explosions do not have as big of a blast radius as they look like they have. The edges of the explosion simply don't touch anything, so you need to be a bit more precise about where to aim and how to time your attacks. However, unlike Missile Command, where the shots you fire have a fixed speed and thus will reach their targets slower or faster depending on how close the launcher is to your targeting cursor, here, the shots always hit where you're aiming after 1/3 of a second, regardless of the distance from the launcher. launcher, thus it doesn't actually matter which launcher you use to attack which eels. Initially, the game is really easy, but as you get further in, the eels will start to move faster and faster, and I'd say around level 13 is when the difficulty really starts to get intense. Now, if you lose a launcher, you will get it back at the end of a level, but if you lose a swimmer, they'll be gone for the rest of the game. You do not get bonus swimmers, like how in the original Missile Command you could get bonus cities to replace any that you lost. And once you lose all 6 swimmers, the game is over, and if you made a high score, it'll show up in the high scores table. Granted, this high scores table is kind of a joke. Shodan dominates pretty much the entire table with absolutely ludicrous scores, which are likely impossible to get, while Edward Diego always starts off with the bottom spot with a score of 5,093 points. Now, to put that in perspective, if you can get to level 8 without losing any swimmers, you're going to beat that score no problem. Again, the difficulty doesn't start to get that bad until around level 13, give or take a couple levels depending on your own skill with this style of game. Now if you do beat Diego's high score, the score which shows up will have the name that you selected while starting a new game, making this one of the extremely few places that name shows up in. Lastly, we have perhaps the most impressive of the 7 minigames, Wing Zero. Not to be confused with Zero Wing. Somebody set up us the bomb!
We got signal!
All your base are belong to us. You have no chance to survive, make your time.
For great justice!
Yeah, not that game. Wing Zero actually has a lot of similarities to Wing Commander, though to a much simpler degree. You play the role of a pilot known as Yorn Bupu Totoka, who's trying to help fight a war against various aliens across the galaxy. Now each mission you go on consists of 4 sectors, and you'll often have a wingman accompanying you. The goal is to wipe out all aliens in a sector, then jump to the next, and once you've cleared all 4 sectors, you move on to your next mission. The controls here do take a little to get used to though, as it's all mouse driven. The direction you turn your ship in is relative to where the mouse is, so if the mouse is centered, you'll fly straight, but the more you move the mouse towards the edges, the faster you'll turn in those directions. Your throttle is indicated at the top, and goes between 0 for no throttle and 150 for full throttle. You hold the right mouse button down to change your throttle, and the speed and direction it changes at depends on where the mouse cursor is. The higher the cursor is on the MFD, the faster it will change towards maximum speed, and the lower the cursor is, the faster it will change towards 0 speed. The left mouse button fires your weapons, but only a single pair of shots. To fire repeatedly, you need to press the mouse button repeatedly, and it's not just a simple mash, as there's some very specific and tight timing to get the best rate of fire possible. You also have a small radar to help you figure out where the enemies and wingmen are, but it's not always that helpful given that it's slightly angular and doesn't show height lines, so sometimes even though it looks like something's supposed to be in front of you, it may actually be above you to some degree. Now you also don't have a health display, so there's not really a good way to know how damaged you are. Now there is a very specific sound effect which plays when you or a wingman take a hit, but that's about the most you have to go on. Now if you do run out of health, you'll get a message about it, and then I'll have to start the current mission over again. Now something to keep in mind about Wing Zero is that it's actually a pretty long game, so unlike all the other games, this one has an autosave. Whatever mission you leave off on will be the mission you return to the next time you boot the game in your current run. And yes, this state is saved to your actual System Shock save files as well. Good thing too, because I clocked this game as taking a little over half an hour to beat. For what is a very simple 3D space shooter, there's a lot of missions, and the further you get, the harder they get too. In fact, the second last mission is just one massive battle between numerous enemies and every single wingman you've got all at once. And yeah, that's it for all of System Shock's minigames. And part of what prompted me to make this video is I noticed Night Dive Studios, the company making the new System Shock remake, put out a call for pixel art talent a number of days ago, which for a game steeped in modern HD graphics and designs wouldn't make a lot of sense if you didn't realize they're likely implementing minigames just like the first 2 Shock games had. And that reminded me that I'd never really given a fair shot at the original minigames, so I figured it'd be a fun idea to showcase them. But here in the original System Shock, Wing Zero and Eel Zapper are the stars of the show, and are the 2 that you may want to give a second chance if you've just glanced over the minigames yourself. Anywho, that's all for this episode of ADG Pro. Next week will be a standard Ancient DOS Games review, episode 284, where we're going to be taking a look at a game which, upon first glance, looks like a weird hybrid of Populous and SimCity, though definitely doesn't play like Populous. maybe a little like SimCity, but even then not quite. So be sure to tune in next Saturday to see what kind of crazy graphical hybrid I've got lined up for everyone. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to those of you supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small random selection of you all.